In this video, we want to look at dividing polynomials. Yesterday, we looked at adding, subtracting, multiplying polynomials. Today, we want to look at dividing polynomials. Now, before we get into that, let me do a little review here of just like some numbers and how we divide and factor numbers. So let's say we looked at 12. And I said, well, what are the factors of 12? We could have 3 and 4. You could have 2 and 6. You could have 12 and 1, and so forth, right? Now, some of these you could break down further. 6 you could break down as 2 times 3. 12 you could break down as, or excuse me, 4 you could break down as 2 times 2. 12 you could break down again, 2 times 6, 2, 3, and so forth. But you can see for all of these, we're going to end up with 3 times 2 times 2. So the factors of 12 are 3, 2, and 2. Now, let's say we wanted to divide 12 by 4. So this would be 4, do long division divided by 12. And if we did that, we would get 3. The remainder is 0, so that means 12 divided by 4 is 3. Which makes sense because 3 and 4 are factors. So if you divide by 4, you get a factor of 0. Now, if I would divide 12 by 5, I would have 2, 10, subtract, and I get a remainder of 2. Because 5 is not a factor of 12. So I get a remainder. Over here, I guess I got a remainder, but it was 0. So we want to take all of these ideas and go to polynomials. Now, we are not going to do long division for polynomials. We're going to have a slick kind of shortcut to help us do this, but we want to try to divide by polynomials. So first, let's review something we've already talked about before. Let's factor x squared plus 6x plus 8. We want to factor this into our factors. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 8, add to give us 6. It's 2 and 4. So this would be x plus 2, x plus 4. So let's say, even if we wrote this like we did our factor trees with our numbers, that the factors of this are x plus 2 and x plus 4. If I divided x plus 4, and I'm going to write this down, but we're not actually going to work through and how you would do this, and I divided x squared plus 6x plus 8, and I divided those by the same method up here, 4 into 12, 4, we got the 3. You can kind of see here that my answer is going to be x plus 2. Because if those are x plus 4 and x plus 2 are the factors of this. So how are we going to be able to do this? How can we do this long division? Which it's possible to do long division in math. We're just not going to do it here right now. So here's how we're going to do it. And it's kind of this shortcut way. It's called synthetic division because it's not real division. It's just kind of a trick that works to get us our answer. So if you consider up here, because this is a factor, our remainder would be 0, right? So here's how we're going to do it. We are going to take the number, the factor we're dividing by, x plus 4, and just like we've looked at with a lot of stuff, we're going to say what number comes out of x plus 4, and we switch the sign, and we get negative 4. So I'm going to put negative 4 in the box. We're then going to write down the coefficients of what we're dividing into. And this is 1, 6, and 8. Now this is how we do synthetic division. Okay. I'm going to start off by just dropping this 1 straight down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take 4 times negative 1, and that gives us negative 4. Then we're going to add those two. 6 plus negative 4 is 2. Then we're going to take 4 times 2. We're going to write that here, which is negative 8. We're going to add those, and we're going to get 0. Now, to show you what we end up with, let me kind of remove some of these lines, because as you do these, you won't necessarily need these lines to help you see what you're doing. But you always multiply on that diagonal and then add. So we negative 4 times 1, negative 4. We add. Negative 4 times 2, negative 8. And then we add. And we get to here. Now, we started with an x squared. So when we start with an x squared, we drop 1, and this just becomes x plus 2 with the remainder of 0. And there is our answer. The same thing we had gotten up here by kind of knowing what the factors were. But let's say we want to divide, and it's not a factor. So we know x minus 3 is not a factor like this, because we know what the two factors are up here. X minus 3 is not one of those. So that means if we divide by something that's not a factor, kind of like 5 into 12, we should get a remainder. So let's try this. First off, we need to figure out what number goes in the box. Negative 3. Excuse me, positive 3. Opposite there. It's x minus 3, so 3 goes in the box. We write down our coefficients. 1, 6, 8. Those are our coefficients, 1, 6, 8. We drop the 1. Now we multiply. 3 times 1 is 3. Now we add. 6 plus 3 is 9. Now we multiply. 3 plus 9 is 27. And we get 35. Now, the thing to look back here on our previous one is it always works out that this last number here, that last number there is always the remainder. If the remainder is 0, it's a factor. If the remainder is not 0, it's not a factor. Now, we started with an x squared. That means that we drop 1 to x. So this is 1x plus 9, and we just go down in order. So our answer is x plus 9 with a remainder of 35. So if we take x squared plus 6x plus 8 and we divide by x minus 3, there is our answer. Let's look at some more. Divide x squared minus 2x plus 2, divide it by x minus 2. So first, what number goes in the box? 2. Write down our coefficients. 1, negative 10, 2. Drop the 1. Multiply. Negative 2 times 1 is 2. And then we add. Negative 10 and 2 is negative 8. Now we multiply. 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. You get 14. We started with an x squared, so we drop down 1, and we get 1x minus 8 with our remainder of negative 14. Okay. So this is basically, we're doing division. We're basically doing long division, but instead of this long and messy, we're doing this kind of shortcut synthetic division. Now let's try another one. We jumped up to an x cubed. So now we do it the same way. What number goes in the box? We change the sign, it goes to -2. We write down the coefficients, 1, 4, 6, and 4. We drop down the 1, and we multiply. -2 times 1 is -2. Then we add 2. Then we multiply, -4. Then we add 2. Then we multiply, -4, 0. This is our remainder. Remainder of 0 means this is a factor. We start with an x cubed, so we drop down 1 degree and we get an x squared. So it's 1x squared plus 2x plus 2. These are just the coefficients going in order, and our remainder is 0. And if you get a remainder of 0, that means it is a factor. And if you really wanted to work this back out, you could take x plus 2 from what we did yesterday and x squared plus 2x. And if you multiplied those together and did, all of these that we did yesterday, you would get what we started with. That's just how division and multiplication work. Now let's look at 2 special cases here. So first, what number goes in the box? 1. We write down our coefficients, 1, -2, but now you notice there's no x term. We have x cubed, x squared. There's no x term, so we want to think of this as 0x. So now we put 0 there, and we put 7 there. You always have to have every single coefficient, even if it's 0. We drop the 1, we multiply. 1 times 1 is 1. We add -1. 1 times -1 is -1. Then we add 0 plus -1 is -1. We multiply, we add, we multiply, we get -1. We add, we get 6. We started with an x cubed, so we drop down. This becomes 1x squared minus 1x minus 1. And our remainder is 6. And as you know with these, we could just write this as x squared minus x minus 1 if we wanted to not actually write down the 1 in front. One last one, a big one here, all the way to x to the 4th. So we're going to say what number goes in the box? 4. And then we have 2, -11, 11, 4, and 4. Notice we have all the terms there. Drop the 2. 4 times 2 is 8. Add -3. 4 times -3 is -12. Add -1. 4 times -1 is -4. Add 0. 4 times 0 is 0. Add 4. So this is my remainder. The last number is always the remainder. Here, we're going to write down our coefficients. We started with an x to the 4th, so we're going to drop 1 and get 2x cubed. And now we just go right down the line. Minus 3x squared minus x, it would be plus 0. We don't necessarily need a 0, so we could just write that like this if we wanted to, with a remainder of 4. So the important thing with synthetic division, some things to make sure we recognize. 1, the number that goes in the box is always opposite of what we're dividing by. Okay? The number that goes in the box is always opposite of the thing we're dividing by. Okay? That's 1. 2, when you divide, if you start with an x cubed, it drops to an x squared. If you start with an x to the 4th, it drops to an x cubed. If you start with an x squared, it drops to just an x, or an x to the 1. So it always drops one exponent, 1 degree, after you divide. All right, so that is how we divide polynomials. We still haven't really got into applications of where we want to divide and why we want to subtract and multiply. We're just kind of looking at the mechanics right now of how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, so we can move forward and use it to answer questions.